Hey everybody, Jason Blaha here with Ice Cream Fitness. Hold on, let me give you guys a couple of bicep shots first. Alright, now that that's out of the way, let me get to the topic of the video. Today I want to cover kind of again the 80-20 rule that I like to bring up every now and then. And in regards to kind of the role of compounds versus isolation movements, particularly for less advanced trainees, people who've only been training 6 months, a year, even 2 years consistently. Now, again, this is not necessarily scientific fact. A lot of this video that I'm going to cover, a lot of my videos, I do like to stick to the facts, the scientific facts, the things that we can prove, and that we can test, that we can observe. Today, this is going to be my personal opinion. A lot of this is anecdote. This is my observations, my experience, my personal philosophy on the matter. So again, a lot of the other people who I associate with on forums and things who have their YouTube channels are going to disagree. I mean, I'm sure, like Ian McCarthy might disagree with some of this, or Eric Kaneski and some of the other guys that I interact with online a bit. They may disagree with this, and that's perfectly fine because this is more of a matter of just personal philosophy and the way of organizing things and prioritizing them. All right, so that being said, again, the 80-20 rule that I like to bring up sometimes is, again, people who tend to, the iron game, they tend to put 80% of their efforts into the things that are only going to give them 20% of the results. And I think we see that again with the compound movement versus isolation things, particularly, in the more modern bodybuilding world where, magazine culture has massively influenced people. We see so many early trainees just putting such a heavy focus on isolation movements and viewing them as their primary mass builders even for individual muscle groups. And honestly, it's a very inefficient way to go about doing it. And again, I'm not anti-isolation movement. Again, I'm oftentimes called a barbell Nazi because I tend to give reasons why I think barbells and are superior to dumbbells and things on most movements and for most body parts and for most purposes and things like that, and again, so I tend to get that stereotype, and it can be the same when I mention these things on compounds versus isolation movements. I mean, I personally do isolation movements. I'm not anti-isolation movement. And in fact, today I just, I uploaded my video from yesterday or the day before on my novice 5x5, and there are people who don't like the fact that I have for novice trainees, I have curls in there. I have curls and skull crushers in the routine for a novice. And so again, I'm not anti-isolation movement. And I mean, and I'll be the first people to tell you that 90% of people cannot build particularly impressive biceps without doing some type of curl. So I'm not anti-isolation movement, but I think that they need to be heavily de-emphasized. And what I mean by that is that generally speaking, I think that 80% of your growth in any given muscle group is going to come from your compound work. And your isolation movement is only going to account for a small percentage of that in a well-based program. And the reason for some of that being, sure, we can go in and do 15 sets of isos. If you're doing a body part split and you're on a ton of drugs and you're stacking, testosterone with growth hormone, insulin, and other things in hefty amounts, and you can grow for a week straight, more power to you. Sure, you can do that. You can come in and do 15 sets of isos for a body part, trash it, and leave it alone for a week. But again, with natural trainees, particularly the novice natural trainee, they need to be hitting every muscle 3 times a week. And we could make arguments for more advanced naturals, going to 2 times a week per body part, but that's another debate. But I think most of us will agree, someone who's only been lifting 6 months or even up to 2 years, most people who understand how this works are going to say that person should probably be hitting each muscle group 3 times a week. So if you're doing that, you don't really have a lot of room to go in and do a bunch of isolation movements because, again, if you're not doing any heavy pressing for your delts and you're going to go in and try to do 3 sets of front raises, 3 sets of side raises, and 3 sets of, rear delt flies, you're going to have to do that 3 times a week, versus just coming in and doing 3 to 5 heavy sets of some sort of press. And so again, and even then we get into the question of someone starting out early. You have to wonder, why do they even need all of these isolation movements? Because my personal view is, since you need such a high training frequency as a natural trainee, or even for people who are enhanced who use very small amounts, they have to have a high training frequency to make optimal results. So with that being said, you're generally going to want to pick the most efficient movements you can that hit as many muscle groups as possible for the majority of your work. And in that way that you can do fewer total sets and recruit more muscle fibers all throughout your body. And then once you've done that, you come back and whatever has maybe not been hit as effectively, or seems to be a weak point in your personal physique or something you need to bring up, or it's going to be a potential likely weak point like biceps. Most people, with some exceptions, I've seen guys with 19-inch arms who don't curl, who are actually natural. I mean, it happens. It's rare. It's very rare, but those genetic freaks do exist. But biceps are an example. I mean, most people are going to need to do some curls in there. So I mean, that's not a bad idea to throw some curls in, because it is a very likely muscle group to develop in imbalance. And even I'd say for most intermediates, the rear delt is a muscle group that tends to get imbalanced, by the time you get past that first year of training. So those are things that, okay, fine, you add those in. But if you're randomly just adding in isolation movements that you don't need, and you have limited gym time, you're basically taking time away from more efficient movements. And I mean, it's the same thing. You'll see guys come in and do 3 different isolation movements for, for their delts, and you get into the question of, their whole body is a weak point. If their whole delt is a weak point, if they can only, overhead press, off their chest, with a barbell, 95 pounds for, 5 reps, or even if they're doing, choosing to do seated dumbbell presses, if they're using, 40-pound dumbbells for these, for sets of 5 or 6 reps, their whole shoulder girdle is weak. They don't have any shoulder development. And so, why are they coming in and trying to correct the individual weak points when they need to just be building the entire region? They need to just be doing heavy pressing and other movements to just build up their whole shoulder girdle, because that's what's going to get them where they need to be quicker, rather than them coming in and trying to isolate muscles that don't necessarily need to be isolated, that they're not necessarily getting as much benefit from as if they just come in and put the focus on the heavy work. And so, I mean, we see that a lot in this, and again, my stance on that is that, generally speaking, since you've got to train at a higher frequency, if you're training, clean or even close to clean, and even then, people who use stuff, most of them do not stay on it all the time. They're going to have to come off at some point. And when they do, I mean, if they don't know how to train natural, then, again, there goes all of their gains. So that steroid-induced muscle mass just kind of melts off, which, we see it all the time, because, again, they don't know how to train natural. And so then when they come off their stuff, they deflate, far more rapidly than they would if they were just training correctly. So again, you'll see these the problems with that. So again, if you're having to train on a high frequency, to induce growth, you just don't have a lot of room for inefficient movements that aren't necessary. And again, if you're adding a bunch in, you're taking time away for movements that could be inducing overall growth. And I'm not saying don't work on your weak points. Now, I mean, if you've been lifting, for a year, and now you're starting to see that your upper chest is a weakness, or your rear delts, or your biceps, or your hamstrings, then by all means get in there and start doing weak point training, but do not remove heavy work to do it. It's the same with, when someone develops a chest imbalance and I would have them add dumbbells in for their chest, I'm not going to tell them to stop flat benching with a barbell. That's one of their primary mass builders. It's a very efficient movement. I'm going to have them add extra work in for the weak point. I'm not going to have them de-emphasize their primary movements. I'm going to have them add stuff in. And again, that's what happens as you become more advanced as a bodybuilder. Your workloads and your workouts are going to increase in volume over the years as you become more advanced. They're not going to decrease. So you're not going to necessarily want to take away from a very efficient mass building movement to add in weak point training. You're going to actually add the weak point training to it. So again, I mean, that's just kind of my view on how to balance things like the compounds versus isos, and how to put the emphasis where it needs to be, rather than people coming in and inefficiently trying to isolate every head of each muscle rather than just focus on overall development and just use the isolation movements as they're needed appropriately to prevent weaknesses from developing, in something that it happens easily in like a bicep. Um, but again, you don't need to come in and do six different curling movements for your bicep either. If you're not prepping for a bodybuilding show and probably on hefty amounts of drugs, there's no need for you to be doing that many different isolation movements for a muscle. I mean, you come in and you do a few sets of curls, done correctly and with very efficient movements, and you call it a day. And I hope it was informative, and it gives a bit of my personal philosophy on it. Uh, in my view on how to balance out the importance of your compound versus isolation work, and how to de-emphasize the importance of isolation work other than for its appropriate role of bringing up individual weaknesses, weak heads of muscles, and things like that where it's needed, and using the compound work to do the majority of your mass building. It'll save you a lot of time. It'll be more efficient and more effective in the long run. And that's really all I have to say on that. Let me give you guys another bicep shot, and I'll talk to you next time.